Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's COVID-19 Housing Provider Sharing and Problem Solving session. Thanks for joining us today. I am Torlin Winbush from all Chicago, and I have my colleague, I think Jennifer Perini is on with me today, if I'm not mistaken, to support today's topic. I want to go over housekeeping real briefly. Remember, everybody's on mute until at this point due to the call. And if you have any questions, please put your questions in the chat box. That would be greatly appreciated. And as you get questions throughout the presentation, you can just put questions into the chat box and I'll be able to support you, okay? If you're reminder for those of you who are doing audio troubleshooting, if you're having difficulty hearing us, please join the webinar via your phone, click on audio and then click the telephone. Please follow the dial-in instructions. And if you're on the phone, please do not put us on hold, okay? Thank you. Raise your hand if you have a question. All lines are muted, and use, like I said, the question box to submit your questions, your ideas, your comments, reflections as you're hearing the information or resources as you are hearing on today's presentation. Also in the chat, I just put a PDF link to a resource that's going to tie in today's presentation. So I wanted to share that with you. So our goals, dedicated time for housing providers, share questions, strategies, resources, working towards solutions and common understanding. All Chicago will continue to explore additional topics until the 25th at this time. So please remember to join us, and if you can use, the same login information. We're going to continue to build and explore solutions and increase common understanding, all right? So today's topic is self-care for providers. And right after, at the very end of the presentation, if you can hold on, I have sort of like a polling question that I would want to pose to the attendees to actually place your thoughts inside the questions or / chat box so that I can get some feedback from you, which I appreciate greatly. Okay, so our presenter is Sierra Peterson. She's from NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, and she's going to chat with us a little bit about today's topic. So Sierra, are you there?
I am. Can you hear me all right?
I can hear you just fine. Thank you for joining us today.
Of course. Thank you so much, Torlin. And thank you, everybody, for taking the time to jump on this call today. I am so excited to be discussing self-care with you. I think that this is so important, especially for people who are providing just necessary services for people who really, really need support. So I think that our providers in the city of Chicago see a variety of challenges, whether it's housing instability, poverty, potentially substance use, mental health conditions, and that all takes a toll on us as providers. So I'm really excited to be working through a worksheet with you today and just kind of start this discussion about self-care and how do we maintain our intentionality regarding our own wellness when we're engaging in the wellness of other people. And to give you a little bit of background on me, so I've been happy to train with All Chicago a few times. So I have worked at NAMI Chicago for the last year or 2 years now, providing mental health training to a variety of different groups, everything from housing providers to first responders to workplaces around mental wellness. And I also do a lot of curriculum development for those groups as well. So I am so excited to be here with you today. Prior to that, I also received my master's in social work degree from the University of Chicago, and I have a minimal amount of housing experience working in case management. So I think we're good to move on. So one of the things I wanted to put together for you all is the common responses that those people in helping professions often experience. And these are only a few responses that a lot of people experience who are in helping professions, but I think that these ones are really key, and they're also huge impediments to our own wellness. And one of the things we can do to increase our resilience or our ability to bounce back when we're really struggling on the job is to understand the way our jobs impact us. So for me, for full, complete clarity, I do not do direct service at this moment. However, I do answer our helpline. So we'll talk about our mental health helpline towards the end of the presentation. But those calls can be extremely distressing when you're having people who are either angry, who are coming up against the system, that are just being met with roadblock after roadblock. When you have people who are distressed or worried about their loved ones on the phone, it can be really difficult. And I know in my experience providing direct service in other roles, it's very easy to get burned out if you're not intentional about your own wellness. So these are some common responses that those in the helping professions might experience. The first being burnout. So when we think about burnout, we think about an inability to engage in the same way that we normally do in our job. So we may be feeling extremely stressed, overwhelmed. We might not be able to approach problems in the same way. It may be very difficult for us to have empathy for our clients in the way that we would like to. And so burnout is one of the things that people in helping professions experience. I'd also say there's a lot of burnout that comes from dealing with a broken system. So when I say system, I mean the systems that we're all engaged in, whether it's the housing system, the social service system in general, our government system, when we're advocating for people to try to get access to resources that they need to just live a fulfilling life, and also our mental health system. It's very hard to get people care, and in addition, it's also hard for us to find care on our own. So burnout is one common response that a lot of us experience in the helping profession. The second is a lack of boundaries. So oftentimes there's a certain person that goes into social services or goes into housing or human services. And it's often the person who has had experiences where they can understand and have empathy for someone who's going through a housing situation. So for example, if you grew up in a house where maybe things weren't as stable for you and you wish that you had someone who was there to be consistent and helpful in your own life, you might end up going into a helping profession. Another type of person that might go into a helping profession is someone who just has a giant, big heart and wants to help everyone that they can. They might be the fixer in their family. They might be a therapist for their friends and their family members and their coworkers. And so those two types of people often go into helping professions. And so this is a great resource because that person has empathy. They want to be there for another person, but it can also be difficult because when we fully engage in the work and we're not taking care of ourselves, it's very easy to lack boundaries. And part of that is because when you're in the work of helping someone and you see all of the roadblocks and the barriers that people are experiencing, it's easy to get into this almost sort of savior complex where you want to have a lack of boundaries in order to help everyone all the time. So this may take forms in a few different ways. A lack of boundaries might be allowing clients to come into your office whenever they need something right that minute. Another thing might be staying late. It could be working through your lunchtime because you have clients who really need your assistance in that moment. And while in the moment, it's up to you to make a judgment call about your boundaries and, when you can be flexible and when you can't be. If we are consistently in the helping profession not providing boundaries to other people, it can lead to a situation where people expect you to drop everything for them all of the time. And this can lead to burnout. It can make your job harder, and it can make it absolutely harder to prioritize your wellness. And so that lack of boundaries is a common response, and it's things all of us struggle with. And so we'll talk a little bit more about boundaries throughout this presentation. Another piece of common responses that those in the helping professions often engage in is overcommitment to a cause or overcommitment to their job. And so where does this come from? People who work in helping professions, like I said, might have a very personal tie to the issue that they're working on. So you may have a very personal tie to housing or be very passionate about the cause. And while that's very important, and we need that in social work, we need that in housing, we need that in all human service professions, it can also lead us to only focus our energy on fixing the system that's broken or helping our clients at all moments of the day. So overcommitment can look like, of course, having a lack of boundaries, so maybe staying late. Overcommitment can also look like in your spare time, reading up or watching documentaries or engaging in activism around the same topics you work on. One of the things that I notice about myself is that it's a lot easier for me to say yes to working on a cause I'm passionate about. So for example, I'm very passionate about domestic violence prevention and sexual assault prevention. It's a lot easier for me to say yes to joining an associate board or going to a fundraiser or even doing an extracurricular activity related to my job than it is for me to say, I need to take time for myself. It's a lot harder because a lot of times we know that there are a ton of issues in the world that just need more energy and attention. And it's hard to say no and prioritize our own well-being when we know that this could make a positive difference. But it's so, so important, and it's something we need to practice. Another common response is despair. And so when I say despair, I don't mean just being sad all the time or anything like that. I mean, it changes us to see all of these systems not working in the way we want it to. It causes a lot of pain for us to work with a client who's really struggling. And sometimes it can feel like we can never do enough. And so that's where this despair comes in, where it feels like even if I put all of the energy into the world, I'm not going to solve this problem. And that's a really hard thing to come to terms with. But it's something that all of us experience in human service at some point. And finally, a change in worldview. This is a very common response to working with people and working in a system where people are experiencing a lot of trauma, where you're hearing really, really bad experiences that people are going through, when you're coming up against systems. It can really change the way you see the world. It can make you angry. It can make you very cynical, even about things that are good. It can make it very hard for you to feel good about what you have in life when you know that so many people have so little. And so it can totally change the way that you experience the world. And really where this is all coming from is from a secondary traumatic stress response. So in the helping profession, we're very, very susceptible to experiencing secondary trauma. And it's something that you should look into if you're interested in thinking about how to take care of yourself within this context. And I'm not saying that just because you work with people, it means that you're going to experience secondary trauma. That's not the truth. It's just important to note that these feelings can come up in us, and it's important to know what to do when they start to happen. If you have any questions about other symptoms or other things that maybe you've experienced, or you're wondering if this is a common response, please feel free to throw it in the chat, but I'm able to move on. So now that we've talked about a few different common responses, I want to talk about the importance of self-care. By engaging in self-care and by centering ourselves, we can really increase our resilience and our ability to bounce back from the things that we see in our job. And self-care is very hard. I think a lot of times we think about self-care as, taking a bubble bath or, making sure that you take your vacation time. And these things, while they're great, it's also important to note that self-care can be extremely difficult. Self-care is having hard conversations that mean that you're centering yourself. And that's something that's almost opposite of what we're used to doing in our roles as human service providers. So what I mean by that is self-care also includes having difficult conversations. It includes taking the time to say, hey, I really need 2 hours today to make sure that I'm getting my paperwork done. And I need to make sure that clients cannot barge into my office at that point. And so it might mean having difficult conversations with your supervisor or with your clients to say, hey, this is what I need. And I just really need that. We can try to create a game plan around that. How can I make that a better adjustment for you? So it's often setting boundaries. It's also setting boundaries with yourself and really giving yourself empathy to say that it's okay if you separate yourself from work. It's okay that if you go home at the end of the day and you don't want to watch a documentary on a housing crisis, that's completely okay. And so it's making sure that you're putting up these boundaries and having these difficult conversations to make sure that you're giving yourself the space to engage in your own wellness. And really reconceptualizing self-care is not a frivolous extra thing that you do in your spare time. Really trying to build in self-care activities for yourself within your day is so important. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But self-care doesn't have to be this big activity that takes 2 hours. Self-care can be making sure that in your schedule, you build in 20 minutes between conference calls, or you give yourself 5 minutes just between client meetings, or making sure that you schedule things spaced out throughout the week so you don't burn out. It also includes positive coping skills as well. So in addition to building boundaries and things like that, it's knowing at first it's knowing what you need to help you feel better. And so often it's a lot easier for us to identify what makes us feel better when we're already feeling good. And if you are in this webinar right now and you're in a state of burnout and you're feeling like you're having a really hard time, or work's been difficult, or you've been really struggling with all the issues relating to the pandemic, it might be hard for you to know what you really need in terms of wellness. But I really encourage you, and we'll talk about this in just a second, to think about the things that what really makes you feel good and keeps you balanced. An example of this for me is I really like to exercise. Well, I don't like to exercise, but I like how it makes me feel. And so when I am not feeling well, I know that I need that just to be able to kind of get a little bit closer to feeling balanced again. And so it's important to know what you need, and it's personal for everybody. But one thing to note about self-care too is that self-compassion is key in self-care. We can't work with clients and treat them in a way that we wouldn't treat ourselves. And that's a really hard thing to do. It is difficult to think about so for example, if you had a client that was burning out, they're going to work all the time, they're feeling super tired, they don't have any energy, they're in a crabby mood, and they aren't taking any time for themselves, and you can see that. You as a provider would likely say, hey, let's figure out a game plan. Like, let's work through and try to figure out what you like to do when you're well. You would probably ask them how they're doing and give them some space to vent, but you'd probably also work with them to create a game plan. So now when you think about that, I want you to think about, do you do the same for yourself? And the answer for a lot of us in this profession is no, because we are taught that there's always a demand for services. There's always a demand for needs, and for people getting connected to their basic needs, that our wellness comes second. And we really need to start thinking about how can we as a profession and those who help others really focus on giving ourselves the same compassion we give our clients so we can better serve them. So think about this and think about how you need to respond to yourself in the way that you would a client. And it's very difficult and it takes practice, but it's something you can achieve. All right, I think we're good to move on. So the second piece of self-care is also community care. This is a piece of the discussion that we at NAMI see all the time that is not discussed when we talk about self-care. So while it's important to engage in treating yourself well and engaging in your wellness strategies and advocating for yourself, it's also on us to know that it's not always on us to take care of ourselves. We have to work towards having a community where community care is a norm as well. So community care means essentially that we are not the only people responsible for our wellness. The people who are around us that see us every single day, they need to take ownership of our wellness in the same way. And while that's something maybe that needs to be built with communication and planning, ultimately we should have communities around us that are comfortable with taking care of us. And that doesn't necessarily mean that someone needs to, take over our whole workload. It means that we need to create and advocate for communities around us, whether it's our workplace or our family or our friend group. We need to advocate for a community where, everyone just feels comfortable reaching out and saying, hey, I noticed that you've been seeming a little bit more withdrawn lately. Is everything going okay? And then developing a plan with you. All of us are burned out by the system. It's very hard. And so we need to be able to lean on our community in just a few different ways in order to take care of ourselves. Some of the things that we've done at NAMI in terms of community care, we've done within my department, is I've said, hey, I have back-to-back meetings for the next 3 days and just trying to shift around responsibility because perhaps my colleague has an open moment and she can take a conference call for me. Another thing might be just saying, hey, I've had a really hard day at work. Do you have 15 minutes just for me to talk to you about this problem, and really workshopping it together so I'm not taking on everything myself. So we need to have a community that's fine with picking up the pieces of other people just when it needs to happen. And if you don't feel like you have a community, if you feel like your workplace isn't the best, or you feel like you can't really go to your family members or friends, please know that you always have a community with our helpline and with me. You can always call our helpline. We'll give information about our helpline towards the end, but you can call and get connected to mental health care. You can call and just workshop an issue you have, or you can call and just use us as a listening ear. You can always email me as well if you have any questions. So please know that you have us as a community as well. All right. So now I'm going to move into our wellness card. You all should have received a, and you can see it in the chat, you all should have received a PDF of a document that we use with our ambassadors. When I say ambassadors, I mean our volunteers at NAMI. So we can better understand what people need when they're feeling stressed. And so the first piece of this is when I'm feeling stressed or upset, I'll take the following steps. And when we say activity, we mean something, obviously it's literally an activity, but we're thinking of what are some things that make you feel good when you are feeling stressed. So one thing for this might be, for me, it might be going out of the house. I noticed that during this pandemic, if I don't intentionally force myself to go on a walk, I probably won't. And that is what makes me, that's a quick road for me feeling awful. So I need to make sure that if I'm feeling stressed, I go and I, even take a walk around the block. Another activity that I might do is make sure that I cook myself a healthy meal. For the last about 4 days, I've eaten a ton of bread and cheese, and I love it. It's delicious, but also it makes my body feel terrible. And so if I'm in it, it has led to me feeling just in a different mental space. I felt more foggy. I felt more stressed. And so what I did last night is made sure I cooked like a plant-based meal. So those are some things you can think about. And so I want you to write 3 things down that you can do when you're feeling stressed or upset. And these are particular to you. It might not be anything I've said. For you, it might be going on a walk with your dog. It could be making sure that you take a moment to vent in your journal. It could be calling our helpline. So these are some things that you can do to make sure that you're feeling better. And when we say skill, I mean maybe something that you have to work at. So maybe painting or writing. So different skills you can use. Perfect. Does anyone want to put anything that they put down in the chat about activities or skills just to give others ideas? I'll give you just a second.
Someone share read.
Reading, yes. Reading is really a great way to disengage. It's like a way to vacation and travel when you literally cannot leave your home. So that's great.
Another one is I take a break and go out for a walk.
Okay, I'm with them there.
I know me personally, I write down 5 things that I did, at the end of the day.
Oh, okay.
That definitely helps me kind of process things a little bit in terms of how I take inventory of how I responded to things during the day. So I write down 5 things that I did. No matter what, I don't judge it. I just evaluate it, saying this is something that I did that's positive. It creates a positive place in my head, of course, because I feel like I've accomplished something. So just thought I would share that.
Yeah, thank you. And feel free to share as we go along, because I think that's really helpful. Having a list of things that you did can definitely put you in a better headspace. I mean, something that that I didn't mention, that's a great activity to do when you're not feeling great, is to practice gratitude. And although it's cheesy and it's kind of hard to do when you're in a space where you're feeling really stressed, just making yourself list 3 things that you're really grateful for, whether it's a family member or your work or an interaction you had with a client. Just really practicing gratitude can strengthen your resilience, and there's research to show that. So I think that goes right in line with that, Torlin. Do we have any other pieces that people have said?
Nope, we don't have anything else at the moment. Wait, got one more thing. Love the gratitude piece is what someone shared with us. So thank you.
Oh, good. I'm glad. Yeah, it's so helpful. And so many people find it really, really helpful, especially those living with mental health conditions. They found that it's been really, really helpful in changing their perspective.
Yeah, someone just shared watching comedies.
Oh, yes. I have been trying to engage in watching movies more often. I don't generally like movies because I think I'm too antsy as a person, but I've been
Mhm.
forcing myself to watch comedies, and that's actually been really, really helpful. So great. I think we can move on to the next section. Thank you everybody for sharing your responses. So now we're going to move into, and this might take a little bit more reflection, which is why we provided the PDF of the document, because it may be a little bit hard for you to come up with these on the spot. So please feel free to just start thinking about this and, take the PDF and fill it out at a different time after you've had a little more time to think about it. But it's also important for us to know our own signs that I'm doing well, that I might need more help, and signs of crisis. So when you're doing well, I think all of us have a general understanding of the things that we engage in when we're doing well. When I am doing well, I exercise, I eat better, I am getting better sleep, I'm able to engage with my friends and my family, and I don't feel burnt out after. Like, I'm able to just kind of exist in this happy place. And then when challenges come my way, it's a lot easier for me to kind of bounce back from them because I'm in a different headspace to begin with. But there might be a time when there might be some signs that I'm starting to kind of fall off, that I might need more help. So signs that I might need more help is I'm starting to put things off. And this happens to me in the workplace. So if I am constantly saying, hey, yeah, I'll get that to you in a week, or if I'm starting to reschedule meetings, or if I'm finding that I just really can't engage with anyone, if I'm starting to isolate, that might mean that I'm starting to really need to focus on my wellness a bit more. And then another thing is signs of crisis. For me, a sign of crisis is when I feel like I don't have energy. When my energy goes out the window, regardless of how much coffee I drink, that might mean that I'm kind of in a place where I really need support. Another sign of crisis might be for another person, it might be they feel like they can't get out of bed. You might notice a coworker start being late to work or not come to work. You might see different changes in their mood. And this is all so important and individualized, because my warning signs that my team might see might be totally different than my coworkers. For me, it might be that they can see that I'm procrastinating. For my coworkers, it might be that they literally not literally, but they throw themselves into their work because they're trying to avoid the negative feelings of whatever is going on in their life or at work. So they might overcommit themselves. So know that in the workplace, warning signs can actually look like good things. And so that's why we have to be attentive to the people around us, because the person who isn't doing well at their work, that's absent most of the time, that maybe is withdrawing from the people around them, they might be in just as much trouble as the person who is overcommitting, the person who is extremely high energy, the person who always takes a meeting and always stays late for a client. That person might actually be struggling in their own way. So we have to know for ourselves, what are our own personal signs? So please feel free to throw a few things in there, maybe 3 for each piece. And this is really helpful as well, because once you understand your own signs, you can communicate them better within the workplace, which can in turn lead to less burnout. So if I can tell my boss, hey, I have been pushing off these things over and over and over again, I think I'm feeling overwhelmed, I can, when I'm in that yellow place, I can move back into the green, because she can help me figure out a plan on how to accomplish my work while taking care of myself. And so we want to make sure that we're kind of staying around that green. We don't want to get to the point where we're not communicating with the people around us and then we end up in crisis. So knowing is the first step to being able to advocate for yourself. All right, so now that we've gotten to this point, I think we're able to move on to the next section. So how do you prefer to check in with others? This is just as important as knowing your signs and knowing your own personal signs of when you're struggling and when you're doing well. For some people, how they like to check in might be just a quick text. It might be just a, hey, how have you been doing? I've been thinking about you. And that might be great with them. And they like not having that personal interaction. They can just text back and it's easy for them. For other people, maybe what they prefer is having a phone call, or maybe they prefer to see someone face to face. And I know right now that can be difficult, but perhaps they'd prefer to do a Zoom meeting where you can see each other. And so it's important to know how you prefer to check in with others, so that way the people around you can check in with you in a way that makes sense to them. or make sense to you. So my boss knows that I probably just want a phone call to vent. That's usually what I want when I'm really stressed about something. What I don't want is to have to do a forced Zoom meeting when I'm not feeling like being on camera. And so that's a way that I don't prefer to check in. Another thing might be physical touch. And so this might be more related to your personal life than your professional life. But for example, I'm really comforted by a hug. I have coworkers who are absolutely like, please don't touch me. And that's totally fine. And of course, that's different with clients. But I think it's important to know, how do you prefer to check in and how do you prefer not to check in? So that way you can communicate your needs. And that way, if someone notices that you're struggling, they can check in with you in a way that feels comfortable to you. So I think we're able to move on to the next piece. All right, so this piece is important just because we need to have a plan in case things kind of are starting to get out of hand. So this is essentially was made for our ambassadors, but it's also helpful for us to know ourselves. So if you continue to feel the same way, if you're starting to feel like you're in a crisis and you've been there for a little bit and you're engaging in your coping skills and it's not working very well and you're still persisting in this place of negativity, I want you to think about, who is the person that I would call? Who is my one support person that I could call if I'm really feeling down and I just need someone to talk to and I need to kind of figure out a way to pick myself back up? So you can think about that. It could be a coworker, it could be a friend, it could be a parent, it could be anybody in your life that you feel like is your support person. And if you don't have that person, that's really common. A lot of us don't have people in our lives that we feel like we can come to with mental health. Part of that's related to mental health stigma, but also because sometimes it just doesn't work out that way. And especially if we are the fixers in our community, it's hard for us to think of who would actually be there for us when we're the person who's there for everyone else. So if you are feeling like you don't have someone, don't worry about it. You can even just put our helpline number down. So it's the orange number, it's 833-NAMI-SHY. And you can call us anytime, not anytime. We're open 7 days a week. From 9 a.m. to 8 p.m. Monday through Friday and 9 to 5 on Saturday, Sunday. So you can always call us. If you feel like it ever gets to the point where you are feeling really alone and feeling suicidal, you can always call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. They can be helpful. And if you do feel like you're in danger of hurting yourself, you can call 911 or go to the emergency room. Of course, calling 911 is a complete last resort, but it's important to know that you have the ability to go to a hospital if you need to, and it is an option to think about if you've ever felt this way. So just wanted to throw that out there. So I think we can move on. So like I mentioned, this is our helpline. I'll give a quick briefer on our helpline. I know that we provided a training on our helpline. My colleague and I did it was probably about a month ago within this meeting. But our helpline, it's available 7 days a week. It's free, it's confidential, and we on the helpline have advanced clinical training. So we often have most of our call takers have their master's in social work degree. We also can take calls in Spanish. So please feel free to call us. Like I said, we can be a listening ear for you. We can help direct you to mental health care. So if you're looking to find out what providers in your community take your insurance, or maybe you don't have health insurance, like we can help someone find mental health care based on their criteria. We can also help you if you're concerned about someone else. If you're concerned about a coworker that you have and you don't feel like you can talk to anyone in your organization at this moment, please feel free to call us, and there's no strings attached. You can just call us and we'll help you create a game plan to supporting that person. And last thing is, we can also be helpful in crisis response situations. So if you are worried about someone who is, maybe you feel like they're suicidal or they're a harm to themselves or others, you can call us and help us create a game plan around how do we get this person to the hospital. And so we have partnerships with the Chicago Police Department, with the fire department, with 911, so we can try to be helpful in that way. And one last resource to note, although like I said, it is a complete last resort, it is the Chicago Police Department's CIT, or Crisis Intervention Team. So the Crisis Intervention Team, or CIT team, they are able to dispatch officers that have mental health training that NAMI is a part of. So these officers have received 40 hours of mental health training. They also have partnered with NAMI in the past. They know of our resources, and they also have the criteria in mind to get someone hospitalized, so they can try to solicit that information. So if you ever need to call crisis response, you call 911, you ask for a CIT officer, and depending on, so there are CIT officers in each district on every watch. Depending on their availability, about half the time you'll get a CIT officer dispatched to the scene. So just as an FYI, that is a resource. Please call us if you have time and we can help you figure out that system. So now I think we're actually able to move on to the Q&A. And I know, Torlin, there were a few questions beforehand that a few people sent in.
Yes, so I'm going to share those questions with the attendees so we can explore that. So one of the questions, I think is basically like a scenario, but it has a question component to it. As a provider, I'm tasked with supporting my team, participants, and boss. How can I have a conversation with my boss about supporting self-care? I have a sense it is not a priority and I do not want to get burned out.
So I want to thank whoever had provided this question, because I think this is a question that comes up in social service agencies constantly. I think the demand for providing support to participants while also supporting a team that's doing really challenging work that takes a lot of skills and it also takes a lot of emotion is very, very hard. So one thing I wanted to start with is in the chat, in addition to the handout, there is a link, and what that link is to a mental health in the workplace toolkit that NAMI Chicago created in partnership with an organization called Launchways. So Launchways works with human resources professionals, and what we did is we combined and put our heads together to think of how can we think of best practices for supporting mental health in the workplace. So I would suggest each of you, if you were just interested in reviewing it on your own time, just going through it and starting to think about the reasons why mental health should be a priority in your workplace, and perhaps it can give you an idea of how to talk to your boss about it. So one thing I would say about talking to your boss about supporting self-care, especially if you don't think it's a priority, is to kind of reframe self-care. So when we think about self-care, like I mentioned earlier, it doesn't have to be a big thing. So it doesn't mean that you need to make sure that every day on your shift you're taking an hour lunch, even though you should. That'd be great in terms of preventing burnout. It can mean telling your boss that, or asking your boss, I would say, is probably the best way to do it, is to frame it right. But framing it in terms of, it really means a lot to me for my productivity if I can take 10 minutes between each client session. Sometimes the things that they say to me are really hard to hear, and I want to make sure I'm showing up as my best self for each client. And so a lot of it takes practice and really just building those things into your schedule to make it a norm for your team. And so if your coworkers see you taking time for yourself and they start to think, oh, that's really important for me too, it's going to be that much easier to kind of engage with other self-care pieces. A lot of this is really also setting boundaries. So it might be communicating to your boss what boundaries you need to set in order to be a productive worker. So it might mean saying, I'm happy to stay, if say you're staying after really consistently and you know that it's burning you out, because what ends up happening is maybe you don't have enough time to get your paperwork done during the day, and the last hour is just a mad dash to try to get all your paperwork in. And so maybe you need to talk to your boss and say, hey, I can't continue to stay after work. I want to make sure that I build time into my schedule to complete my paperwork. Because sometimes self-care isn't just taking time and kind of separating and detaching. Self-care is also making sure that you're setting yourself up to engage in the things that you need to do to get your job done. So self-care can be like, taking time to get your paperwork done, but can also be doing things that are difficult that you need to do to stay well. So maybe it's building time in your schedule to address a nagging task. It also might be that you need to really understand how to talk to your boss about self-care. And it might mean instead of I need to do this so I don't burn out, you might have to frame it in terms of my productivity is really important to me. I want to make sure I'm hitting my goals. I think that this is really important because, this is important for making sure that I'm taking the time to best serve our clients. And so instead of framing it as self-care, you might have to make it very performance oriented, and that's totally fine, because at the end of the day, you need to be well. So I think that's kind of my answer to that question. And if anyone has any follow-up questions or any comments about my answer, please feel free to put it in the chat.
Okay, so let me take a look at that. So one of the questions is, how do I get more information on volunteering for the helpline? I think that's something that's coming up a little bit later. I guess you can kind of share with that. And then one of the questions is, RSSI is opening a living room in Austin, hopefully next month. So for those CPD, CFD, etc., that person wants to keep us updated. But this is the question that's probably central to our response to the information that you were just sharing, is what to do when the employer ignores staff.
That's a very hard, it's
Yeah.
a really, really hard question, because you, at the end of the day, like sometimes you have to understand that you can't control a situation. And ultimately you need to take care of your wellness. And so if you are in a place where perhaps your supervisor doesn't hear staff, it might be important to set aside time with all of the team just to talk to them and maybe just start an open conversation about wellness for the staff. I think that's really important. Unfortunately, sometimes you may have to elevate the conversation to the people that are higher than your supervisor. And so I'm not necessarily advising, because I think it totally depends on your career. It depends on, your personality. But I would say give your supervisor the due diligence of having a conversation with them, being clear about what your needs are, and making sure that you're comparing that with whatever's in your employee handbook to make sure that you're able to exercise. For example, if it says in your employee handbook that you get 2 15-minute breaks during the day, making sure that that's something that can be backed up. And then if that's a problem, maybe even talking to HR. These are just some things that we have to think about, because if we are in a situation where we're responsible for clients' well-being and we're trying to help them along this path, and we have a supervisor who maybe just doesn't see self-care the same way, that can be a huge, huge difficulty. But I think advocating, it's going to be a marathon, not a sprint. So we have to advocate as little as we can. In terms of the helpline, so we do not take volunteers for our helpline. We have a full team on there who are paid staff. However, if you're interested in volunteering with NAMI, in the next few months, our volunteer application is going to be open. So please feel free to just check our website regularly. You can also email me if you'd like and you have specific questions around volunteering.
All right. So our second question, thanks so much, Sierra.
Yeah.
Is it okay to stop a session if I'm feeling burnt out, and how can I do it without offending my client?
Yeah, so I think this is a really, really important question. And I think it's tough, because within this provider role, I think that it is our duty to continue a session even if we're feeling burned out. I would say the only time that it would be okay to end a session early based on your own is if there's an actual emergency, or you're feeling threatened, or you're feeling like it's unsafe in the moment. And so I think it's important to make sure that you are able to show up for that client and be consistent, because that's going to build trust in the relationship, and it's going to help them later on. A lot of our clients, who are in these programs, have likely not had the consistency in their life, and probably very, very much appreciate having a consistent person that they can have a session with or a meeting with. And so it's important to stay in that moment. That being said, however, it doesn't mean that the client gets to completely dictate their time with you. So an important thing to do might be setting boundaries within the session. And one of the things I want you to think about is, if you're feeling burned out with a client, it's probably pretty likely that you were feeling burned out, or there's some kind of undercurrent going on of stress before that client came into your office. So maybe you have a difficult relationship with that client, or maybe they have been demanding of you in the past or something like that. Maybe there's like a systemic barrier to wellness, and maybe you aren't able to engage in your coping strategies in the way you normally do. Or maybe you're just having a hard time with your job, which happens sometimes. And so I want you to think about and be curious about, what are the reasons why you're feeling burned out in that session with the client? And is it actually related to them? Because it might not be. However, if it is related to them, and perhaps maybe they're talking to you in a way that you don't appreciate because maybe they're frustrated about something, or maybe you don't appreciate that they always barge into your office and like force time with you when you've tried to set up boundaries before. And so I think one thing to do that's very important and it's very tough is making sure that you're taking the time to be assertive about your own boundaries with clients. Because if you do that and you show, I really value my own time, it also teaches them that they can do the same with others and that they should value their own self-worth as well. And so it might be difficult in the beginning to say, you know, before the next client, say you had the moment when you're feeling really burned out with a client, you finish the session, and maybe part of the reason you were feeling burned out is because they were really irate the whole time. They were very angry and they spent the whole session just venting. Maybe the next session, what you do is you say, hey, I really appreciated our time together last time. It really appeared that you were struggling, but I want to let you know that if you're in this place where you're feeling like you can't calm down, I want to create a game plan with you. Do you mind if we kind of spend that time in figuring out how I can be supportive during that time? So that way the client knows what you're paid, what, you know, where you're coming from, and you can also protect yourself too, because we don't want to be so drained that we're feeling burned out and having to end sessions early. And of course, if anything, if this is really difficult, I suggest that you also talk to your supervisor because they probably have pretty helpful tips on how to create those boundaries and how to support yourself during this work. And it's also another step towards normalizing mental health in your workplace.
Okay. So number 3 kind of maybe ties a little bit in. Do you have tips to keep stress at bay, since I've been dealing with demanding clients and it's causing me to lose sleep and focus?
Yes. So I actually find this question really interesting because I've heard it a variety of times and I've definitely felt the same way about particular clients being demanding. But what I want you to do is if you're thinking about clients being demanding, I want you to think about why you feel that person is demanding and maybe perhaps reframe your thinking around it. Because in this helping profession, we have to be mindful of having empathy for our clients because it's going to make us burn out if we are viewing our clients as annoying or demanding or disrespectful. If we're constantly coming at them with this idea of, you know, of negativity, it's going to make it that much harder for you to get through an interaction with them. Instead, I want you to think about how can I have empathy for this person that might be acting pretty abrasively. And that isn't to say that, you know, if a client's demanding, it's not going to have a toll on us, because it absolutely will. But I think it's important to try to reframe your interactions with clients and saying, maybe this person is being demanding because this is the way they've communicated in the past and this is the way it's worked for them. Maybe the only time they've been able to get something from the system is when they were aggressive. And that's really hard. Or maybe the only time that they were listened to when they were a child was when they yelled back. And so that just may be the way that that person kind of orients themselves to the world. And so it's important to set boundaries with clients like that as best you can. So of course, don't be a doormat. I'm not saying that, because when we're truly empathetic, we don't lose ourselves in that empathy. It's also just making sure that you say, hey, you know, you've been speaking to me in this really aggressive tone. It's something that I've felt and it hasn't made me feel great. I would love if we could figure out how we could plan together to communicate in this way moving forward. Like, or you could say, just so you know, when you respond to me in a very short tone or order me to do something, this is how I'm going to respond to you. I'm going to give you a very calm answer, and this is where we're gonna have to move through this game plan again and again. Because it also teaches them how to kind of ask for things in a way that might actually be more effective for them getting things done. So I think that's really hard, and it really speaks to, if you're kind of viewing clients as demanding or angry or aggressive, it might mean that you're not doing well yourself, because that is one of the signs, is that we start to have really black and white thinking when we're feeling a secondary traumatic response. We think things are either good or bad. And so that might actually be a signal to you if you're feeling really burnt out and you're starting to experience stress from your clients to where it's impacting your home life. It might be a sign for you that there's some big change that needs to happen for you as well. So perfect.
Thank you. So I have an actual statement to sort of reinforce what you were just speaking about. This wonderful person shared, I have too many clients with no help and stressed about not being able to do the job to the best of my ability.
Can you repeat that? Too many clients?
to have too many clients with no help and stressed about not being able to do the job to the best of my ability.
Absolutely. And I think that that's one of the issues with our system. And I wish that I had some sort of soothing thing that I could say about that. But I think when I was working in housing, it was so disheartening and so horrible to see that some people didn't have money for bus fare. And then I felt, because of, social work ethics, I of course didn't feel like I could give money to clients who needed the bus fare when I couldn't give it to other people who needed bus fare. And so it was extremely hard for me to feel like I was making a positive impact. And I think what you can do is just communicate your needs to your supervisors, make sure you're reporting everything you can, and just be really clear with people about what your role is. But it's very, very hard. And I'm really sorry that, that participant's feeling that way, because it's so, so difficult. You all
Yeah.
have really tough jobs, and I want to validate that you do a ton of amazing work. And sometimes the smaller things, so for example, just being there and being that constant person might mean more than the bus fare that you give somebody or that you can't give somebody. So I'm so sorry, but yeah, you all are doing amazing work and it's hard.
Yeah. So it kind of ties in, and then going to the fourth statement that kind of ties into the question. COVID-19 response has been a challenge, but now all of the talks of recovery and the protesting is causing anxiety. How do I cope? I do not feel I can share with my supervisor, who is honestly acting the same way. Is there a team activity I can share to aid us?
Yes, so that's a difficult question as well. So right now we're in an unprecedented time in terms of a pandemic. So that's extremely difficult on all of us. All of us are aware that that is happening. But on top of it, so many issues around race, around police brutality, around inequality are coming to light. And that's very hard. And it's especially hard if you're personally impacted. I mean, I think all of us are impacted, but if your identity is impacted as a person of color, or maybe someone who works in an area that's extremely over-policed or lives in an area that's over-policed, it's really, really hard. And so when I'm thinking about ways that our team or our department has really approached this at NAMI, is there's not so much an activity as making space for people to be able to talk about what they need to. So we have to realize that that stuff directly impacts our work. And so perhaps what you can do is suggest just time to talk about what's going on, whether it's with yourself or even doing like an open discussion with your participants, just to give them space to kind of process. So that might be one thing, but another thing that's important to do is also to ask, to ask your team, say you're in a team meeting and it comes up, and you want to talk about race, or you want to talk about the protests, or you want to talk about the pandemic issues, it's also important to ask, hey, I know that we've all been thinking about this a lot. Is it okay if we talk about this right now? And sometimes it might be really helpful for people to process, but we also have to give respect to the fact that sometimes people just need to focus on their work, and then another day is a good day to plan or to talk or to process. So I think there isn't so much an activity as much as making sure that you're making room for these things in your conversations, and also thinking about how you can impact change within your organization. So if there are different policies that need to be changed, if you want to make sure that you're able to start a new program or have a new approach to providing a service despite the pandemic, those might be some things to think about as well.
Awesome.
Yeah, are there any other questions?
I don't see any other questions. We're going to give them a little chance for them to share if they have some additional questions as it relates to. And thank you. I mean, in essence, you've given us all sort of a very good game plan or strategy to kind of think about a little bit, some reframing, kind of check in and kind of debrief and have these nice conversations, with ourselves, as well as trying to have conversations, within our organization, which is pretty great, Sierra. So thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. And I know that this is so much easier said than done. It is so, so difficult because this isn't the way that this isn't the way we usually operate, is thinking about self-care. So I'm really happy that everyone could share this time with me today.
Okay. Well, great. I didn't see anything additional. So what I would like to do, I wanted to sort of get everyone's thoughts about a specific topic, peer sharing. We've been doing peer sharing since the week of April the 7th or April 9th. And so we started actually on April 2nd. So I wanted to get everyone's feedback on what topics would you like to see explored as it relates to a COVID-19 recovery plan that we be part of an upcoming provider peer sharing webinar. And so what I would like for you to do is just put those comments, insert your topic ideas into the question/chat box for me. I would appreciate that if you can kind of do that in the next, couple of minutes. I wanted to share that with you because I think it's really, really important. And so if you're thinking about things like crisis intervention and you're thinking of that as a recovery topic, one of the questions may be to us is, how is it going to look? Some of the things that you can ask, that you can kind of think about as you're thinking about topics to place in the chat, and as much as you can give me, I'd appreciate it, is what do you feel, or how do you feel it should look? What are some topics that we should explore going forward as it relates to recovery? As we're trying to, as the city opens up, we're going to be thinking about, you're going to hear the comment or you're going to hear a recovery plan a whole lot. So as much information as you can share would be great. And I'd appreciate it. And I'm going to take that great information and kind of be able to support topics that are going to take place going forward. Oh, great. Someone put how to help clients with what comes after the virus or post-trauma. Okay. Post-trauma help for clients. Okay. So just like I said, as you can continue to, for maybe about the next couple of minutes, if you could do that, and then I can give you back some of your time in your day. I just wanted to say thank you, Sierra. I really, really appreciate you coming today to join us, and always appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. I'm happy that I could be helpful.
Yeah, so the recording information will be available to all of you after the presentation. Any other additional handouts or information that was shared today. I just want to briefly share with you our call for next week, which is going to be the 25th from 2:30 to 3:30. Christine Riley from DFSS will lead a panel discussion on what is happening in the homeless sector and work with and what type of work is being done within the sheltered and unsheltered during COVID-19. So I would definitely hope that all of you will be willing to join us next week as we talk a little bit about how COVID has been impacting the shelters within our community, as well as the unsheltered doing all of this within the pandemic. And I think that that's going to be one of the topics, one of the populations that has repeatedly come up, and someone has made a comment about what's happening with those particular populations. So Christine Riley and a panel of wonderful people from the city are going to come and speak to it and kind of let us know what's guidance and what are the steps that are going to take place next within those communities. So I just wanted to share that with you. And I don't see anything else additional that is coming. So I'm going to say thank you all for joining us today. And if you find that you have some topic ideas and you didn't come together at the moment, please feel free to email me at my email address, and we'll see you next week. We'll see you next week for the next peer call on next Thursday. So thanks everyone. Have a good rest of your day.